Friends, we've arrived to the third portion of Psalm 84. Thank you for joining us in our time together in the Psalter. We've been going through Psalm 84 as it's been divided into 3 sections. And if you haven't seen the 2 prior sections, please go back on our YouTube playlist or on our app or somewhere on Instagram, somewhere in the internet, and you'll find them there in our channel. But we've described these divisions with one word: blessed. And the first segment was therefore the blessed presence of God. Blessed are the people that love to be in the presence of God. And again, this describes their devotion, their hunger, and their deepest desire to be with God. And then we studied the second portion, which started off in verses 5 through 7 with the blessed journey. Blessed are those whose strength is in you. In the first 4 verses, 1 through 4, it's the blessed presence of God. And we find the descriptors in the temple, in the courts, in the altar, and in the house of God. And they even say all of their body, their heart, their flesh yearns after the presence of God. The second part, we understood, therefore, that they had to get there. They weren't complacent and weren't happy where they were at. They wanted to go on the journey. As a matter of fact, it was a time of celebration. It was a time of joy as they celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles. It was a reminder for them that God provided. God gave them what they accomplished throughout the year, and they were on their way to offer their thanksgiving. And now we get to the final section, verses 8 through 12, where we find another word: the blessed trust. This word, again, blessed, describes their hope in God. I'm glad you decided to join us. Let's jump into the text. Now, this section begins with 2 interesting verses, 8 and 9, that are verses of intercession. So we have the joys in the hymnary that's going on in verses 5 through 7, and even at the very beginning. And then we get into this moment of intercession. They're saying, "Hear our prayer, O God." And again, they know who they're praying to: God Almighty, Lord of hosts. They know exactly who they're praying to. This is an important aspect for us to remind ourselves as we read these Psalms, that people that looked to God for help, they knew that he could do something about it. They weren't just throwing words in the air. They knew God could do something about it. And so they pray with that understanding, and they ask, intercede, and they're interceding specifically for their king. See, at the end of verse 9, we get the notion of the anointed one. They're praying for the king, which is the representation of God on earth. And if the king governs justly and correctly, he's showing the people what it means to act in the place of God for the people. And so they're praying for that, knowing full well that God will restore to them a king that will bring freedom and liberation to their people. We know this to be not any BC king or king prior to the New Testament, but in the Davidic line of the son of David, the Son of Man, Jesus Christ, which will ultimately be the anointed one who will govern his people justly and bring them safely home. You see, the whole Psalm 84 is describing the presence. It's describing the blessedness of being with God. And what better than to ask for a king that can bring them safely home to Yahweh, that can bring them safely home before their creator. The feast became tied with the feast for the king during the same period, which demonstrated God's salvific, sovereign rule over his people. This is why the pilgrims along the way knew exactly what this festival was about. Their hope was for a future king that would bring about a new Exodus, a return from exile, and a restored temple. and ultimately to spread the reign of Yahweh over all the earth. As God's reign, Yahweh's reign would be spread throughout all the earth, that would again bring the reality of presence everywhere. Now, the people of Israel understood the omniscience and the omnipresence and the omnipotence of God. And they understood that he was everywhere, but there was a specific manifest presence in the temple. But when this new king would come, that would be established everywhere. And there would be no longer a journey to get to the presence of God. After that small intercession, there's a hymn that returns, and it's a hymn of comparisons. At the beginning of verse 10, we find the beautiful words again. For a day in your courts are better than 1,000 elsewhere. And so we begin to see a comparison with their reality at the moment and what it means to be in the presence of God. And we may think that most of these people are in continuous suffering or are always depressed, separate from the presence of God. But it's also the reality that we face today. There's some people that are completely fine, completely happy with what they have and where they're at in life. They're successful. They have a bank account to prove they're successful. They can travel. They can do whatever they want. And so the case may be with those in the past. We even know that way back in Abraham's time, he was a wealthy man. So wealth was not the issue here. There were some that were wealthy. There were some who were like the 1% of our modern day. But even then, with everything they had, whether it be good or bad, whether they have a lot or have a little, whatever the case may be, for them, a day in the courts of God, which again speaks on the proximity of being in the presence of God, is better than 1,000 of whatever good days they have. Nothing would compare to be in the presence of God. And the second comparison is they would rather be a doorkeeper. What that means is even if they don't get to go inside the temple, they would rather simply be at the door of the temple. And this door represents a lot. You obviously want to go in if you're having this journey. If you've gone through the valley of Baca, you want to get into the temple. But the door also represents the great division, where there are those that see the door and yearn to go in. They've been wanting the presence of God. They've been wanting to get into the courts of God because of his presence. But there are others that are okay with where they're at. And so the door for them is what the psalmist describes, the way or the tents of the wicked. You see, as they put their tents along the courts, along the temple, there are others that are simply going around their business, others that are in commerce, others that are just doing life and enjoying it and being rather happily doing it. But the real happiness, therefore, belongs to those who go in through the doors. And so for them, that comparison, even at the door of God, I'd rather be here than to dwell with all of these other people that are wicked and that don't want you and that have rejected you. This is what the psalmists are singing. The psalmist is singing, and all the people that are on the way to Zion, they're singing this. There are those that don't want the presence of God. And that's pretty evident even in our modern day. There are those that are happy with what they have and would rather stay away from anything religious or church oriented. They want to be where they're at because they're comfortable there and they enjoy it and they love it. And they can tell you with a pretty solid, stern face, they don't need anything else. Well, those who are devoted to God, those who have realized that they're nothing without God, they're the ones that would rather be at the door than spend their time with everyone else who has rejected God. And that's what they call the tent of the wicked. The final verses in this segment lead us, therefore, into that final blessedness. These verses 11 and 12 look to God and they bring in some rather interesting descriptions. We saw it a little bit in verse 9 as the shield. God is the shield. And here in verse 11 and 12, he's the shield and the sun. Again, describing who God is, the attributes of God. Ultimately, even in our modern day, blessedness or happiness are found in these two symbols: protection and life source, and the giving of life. And that's what makes everyone happy, and therefore everyone's looking for protection and sustainment and life source. Everybody's looking for this, and once they find it, they feel like they're complete, like they need nothing else. They got a good job, a great career, and their family is protected, their health is protected, they got the best doctors, they got it all. Well, the psalmist, again, reminds us who this really is. It's God. He is the shield. He is the sun. He is the ultimate protector of those who walk upright, those who are not like the wicked, those who seek for God. He's their protector. And because he's the Lord of hosts, because he's the God of armies, he can protect and he can defend. And that's why we don't have to be afraid. The psalmists here, the singers, don't have to be afraid. They don't have to be sad. They don't have to fear, because God will protect them. That's something that we miss often in our modern day. We're trying to find this protection, or I don't even know what we would call it here, with our houses, or with our income, with our status in life, with our careers, and with our stock portfolios and all of that. And it's meaningless. There is no protection in that. And we see how people get so devastated once that element is wiped out. And then, as the other side of blessedness comes in, the life source. As our life in our modern day, with AI, artificial intelligence, that has come in to even supplant what we've considered real in our own day. We have the real source of life, which is God, the Son. He is the source of life. And he is the source of life for those who are singing along the way to Zion. When we read these Psalms, they're not just fun to memorize, but they mean something. And it reminds us of what it means to believe and trust in God. That's why it ends with, "Blessed is the one whose hope is in the Lord." Do you see that? We see this progression. Blessed are those who dwell in your house. Blessed are those whose strength is in you. And blessed is the man whose hope is in the Lord. These three blessings, or these three blessedness, are descriptions of true happiness. Happiness that you will find in nothing and no one else, no matter how hard you try, or even how much you say to yourself that you're truly happy. You can't find it separate from God. And as we read this Psalter in a devotional type of context, and this little mini Bible study that we've provided for you online, it's more than just simply watching a YouTube event. It's more than just another YouTube video in the algorithm. It's for you to really take a moment and pause and examine your life and find where you are blessed, where you are blessed, where you are happy, or where do you find your happiness. Friends, I'm glad that you joined us in this segment in the Psalter. Get ready for the next one that will come up. We'll drop in some YouTube shorts or some reels pretty soon to give you a heads up on what psalm we're going to be studying. But get ready, because the life in the Psalter is a life that will get us to know who our God is. So I pray that your blessedness comes and finds itself in the ultimate source of life and protection, Yahweh, God, and that Jesus Christ be real and the only King in your life. See you next time.